r/AskReddit. What's your childhood mystery that you've finally solved years later? When I was in elementary school, I always wondered what the teacher's staff room was like. It seemed so mysterious, and I remember trying to get a peek anytime I walked by and the door would open. Later became a teacher and can fully confirm they're dull, often toxic spaces full of cranky teachers complaining about students. When I was like 8 or so, I answered our house phone, and it was a man, who asked to speak to my mom. Didn't ask for her by name, said, "Could I speak to your mom, please?" I asked who it was and he said, "It's Santa Claus." I was so excited and ran to my mom, and I was telling all my friends for days that Santa Claus had called my house. This led me to believe in Santa for a few years longer than most kids normally do. I was heartbroken when I found out that Santa wasn't real. Years and years later, I remembered to ask my mom who had called that day and said they were Santa Claus. It was our reverend, and my mom was a deacon. He had known me for years, so recognized my voice when I answered and knew what age I was. It had never occurred to me. I visited my dad when I was 6 or 7 years old at the place where he worked, or so I was told. I remember remarking at the time, and people laughed at me, because I said it looked just like a prison. The people laughing were the guards, and I was indeed visiting my dad at Terminal Island Federal Correctional Institution, where he was a federal inmate. I was watching Star Trek TNG with my dad when someone told Riker to wash his back. When I asked my father why someone would say that to another person, he said, "So you can smell someone coming up behind you." It wasn't until years later that I understood how easy it was to hear "watch" as wash, and how committed my dad was to willfully deceiving his children for personal satisfaction. My dad is an ex-Catholic, and every night when he'd tuck me in until I left the house, he'd say, "We love you. God bless you. Good night." And I was always wondering why, since he had stopped going to church long ago. Fast forward to me being 28 years old and watching an old Bruce Springsteen concert together, one of his favorite artists, and Bruce says, "We love you. God bless you. Good night," at the end of his set. I turned my head towards my dad and asked if this is why he said that for years to me at night. He laughed and said, "I have no original material." John Travolta was actually John Travolta, which really made a lot more sense the reason my aunt punched her husband at the pool during a huge family vacation. It was because she found out that the long-distance charges to the hotel room they shared had a ton of calls to a woman he was known to think was swell, who ate all the cherries in the cherry cake. I was blamed for this for years after someone picked out all of the cherries and ate them during a family Christmas party. 8 years later, my little sister confessed to me that it had been her. My mom used to call us in for dinner by yelling out the back door from the kitchen. I was in middle school before I realized the screen door was actually called a screen door. Not mine, but my husband's. "I hope he doesn't see this BC, then my cover is blown." He said in middle school, there was a time that he'd get pulled out of class to shoot free throws in the gym. Only him. He didn't think this was strange, but didn't understand why he was the only one that got to do that. Turns out, his parents told his teachers he couldn't participate in sex ed. Haha, my dad used to say he could stop the rain for a moment by snapping his fingers. He'd do it in the car, when it was pouring. I was so mesmerized, told all my friends about it, well into late elementary school. I've since realized he'd snap as we drove underneath an overpass. I've always wanted to know what was behind the ATMs at a bank, how it worked, and where did the money come from. I grew up and worked at a bank just to find out some fat dude had to squeeze behind the ATMs to refill it, me. In preschool I had a substitute teacher who had a long pinky nail. I asked him how come, and he told me it just grows faster. Years later I realized I used to go to our local YMCA after school and during the summer when I was a kid. We went swimming in the pool almost every day, and being the curious kid I was, I always wondered what was behind the caution doors with the weird triangle markings. Fast forward 8 years and I'm now working at that YMCA as a lifeguard. And behind the doors? Old, smelly pool chemical testing rooms. Very anticlimactic. My dad and sister used to play pranks on my dad's secretary. When we grew up, he admitted that he was having an affair with her. It makes my skin crawl thinking that he used my oblivious little sister to flirt with this woman behind our mother's back. 9/10 times it wasn't a skunk. In kindergarten I had a guinea pig that turned into many guinea pigs after I babysat the class guinea pig for Christmas break. Parents were thrilled. Anyway, my teacher took the entire family back to her house and was supposed to sell them, and I would get my original guinea pig back. They never returned, and my parents told me they all got sold together as one big happy family. I didn't find out until I was maybe 25 that a coyote actually got into the cage and they all got eaten together as one big happy family. This is the way. The random claps at midnight in my house weren't from ghosts. And weren't claps either. The smell of my neighbor's house growing up was actually the smell of some dank-ass weed. As a kid, I once had a bad dream that my parents locked me in my room by tying a rope between the doorknobs from my door and the bathroom door directly across the hall. It must have been a dream, because my parents would never do that to me. Years later, I found out that's exactly what they did. Apparently, I had horrible night terrors and would run screaming into their room. After so many sleepless nights, they couldn't handle it anymore. My door didn't have a lock, so they came up with the rope solution. Thank goodness I eventually grew out of the night terrors. Once when I was about 7 or 8, my family was having a pool party and my 20-something aunt was sitting by the pool with a glass of clear liquid. I was hot and thirsty, so I reached for her drink, and she said, "Don't drink that, it's pool water." I wondered why in the heck she'd have a glass of pool water, but left it alone. Years later, as my family's alcohol consumption habits became clearer to me, I realized that she was probably drinking vodka. Mystery of why my mom never ordered anything for herself and was never hungry whenever she took my sister and I to eat out. 25 years later, she told me she really was hungry and wanted to eat too, but she only had enough money to feed the two of us. She didn't want us to feel guilty. I love my mom so much. Growing up I always insisted I liked the mashed potatoes at my grandma's house better than the ones my mom made at home. My grandma once told me it's because she uses a special recipe. I found out last year that my mom hand mashes her potatoes. My grandma just gets the Betty Crocker boxed shit. Her special recipe I was gonna get what she does is Betty fucking Crocker. My year 6 teacher thought I was gay. Pulled me aside and said she knew I didn't like girls. I was in my late 30s before I put 2 and 2 together. She was incorrect, but I appreciate where she was coming from. When I was a kid my mom would make pierogies with diced bacon. Somehow by the power of some mom magic this bacon would taste onion-y and the bacon pieces would be half meat half onion. For my whole childhood I believed it was just the way she cooked the bacon. At 20 I move out and make pierogies. I dice the bacon and fry it up. It is in that moment I realize she diced onion and bacon and cooked them together. I've never in my life felt so dumb. When I'd go hang out with my dad for the weekend, we would sometimes go to this park with a huge hill. He'd disappear for a few minutes at a time, kinda on the other side of the hill. I asked once where he would go and he told me he had a box of jewels buried there and had to make sure they were still safe, so I believed him. I'd roll down the hill, watch the clouds, or go to the park at the bottom of the hill while my dad would make sure nobody stole the treasure. Turns out there were no jewels, but it was his favorite smoke spot. The babysitter who used to torture my little brother and I when I was 4 and 5 was not a babysitter. She was our foster sister. Parents ended up not adopting her. Good call. That the brown part of bread doesn't contain the nutrients. It's just the more cooked outer layer. My brother lied to me to get me to eat crust when I was a kid.